He called me not strategic at 10:14 a.m. By 4:17, I was in a glass conference room 3 floors up, across from his boss's boss with a flash drive, a paper trail, and one sentence that would vaporize his career. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. My receipts spoke louder. The thing about revenge is, it tastes better when served in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, where everyone below can see the execution, but can't hear the blade drop. My name is Hannah Greer. And at 34, I'd learned that strategic thinking in corporate America meant knowing which ass to kiss and when to pucker up. I'd been at Veridian North for 3 years, hired with promises of transformative opportunities and leadership pathways. What I got instead was a front-row seat to the most spectacular shit show disguised as a marketing technology company. The Veridian North headquarters occupied floors 22 through 27 of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, all exposed brick and reclaimed wood that screamed, "We're innovative," while our actual innovations consisted of repackaging the same failed campaigns with new PowerPoint templates. I'd walked through those doors in 2021 with an MBA from Wharton and a decade of experience turning data into dollars. Now, I spent my days untangling financial projections that looked like they'd been created by a cocaine-addled Excel wizard and ghostwriting strategies for executives who couldn't spell ROI without autocorrecto. Our CEO loved to talk about synergy and disruption in all-hands meetings, while the company hemorrhaged money like a severed artery. The board of directors, a collection of golf buddies and yes-men, nodded along to revenue projections that defied both mathematics and reality. Meanwhile, I sat in my corner office, yes, I'd earned that much, watching the numbers tell a different story, inflated metrics, buried losses, and campaign performance data so massaged it needed a happy ending. Every morning, I'd arrive at 7:30 a.m. to find new fires to put out, the APAC campaign that promised 300% ROI but delivered negative returns, the influencer partnership that cost us $2 million and generated exactly 17 legitimate conversions, the revolutionary AI-driven targeting system that was just a random number generator with a fancy UI. And every morning, I'd fix it, quietly, invisibly, because being strategic, apparently, meant being silent. The real kicker, I was good at my job, damn good. While the C-suite played corporate theater, I rebuilt forecasting models, salvaged client relationships, and turned data graveyards into presentable narratives. I'd saved Veridian North from at least 3 lawsuits and 1 SEC investigation just by catching errors before they left the building. But in a company where perception trumped performance, being good meant being dangerous, and being a woman who was good, that was unforgivable. I'd learned to document everything not out of paranoia, but out of pattern recognition. Every email, every revised projection, every minor adjustment to the numbers. 3 years of watching credit flow upward while accountability flowed down had taught me that in corporate America, your receipts were your only religion, so I kept them all, organized by date and cross-referenced by project. In a folder I'd named Insurance, because when you're the only one actually thinking strategically in a building full of strategists, you'd better have a backup plan. Mark Allen was the kind of manager who wore his Harvard MBA like a Medal of Honor and treated every meeting like a TED Talk audition. 6 feet of manufactured confidence wrapped in Tom Ford suits. He joined Veridian North 6 months after me and somehow rocketed straight to senior director while I remained frozen at principal analyst. The org chart said I reported to him. Reality said I was his ghostwriter, fact-checker, and professional ass-saver. Every Monday at 9 a.m., Mark would swagger into the conference room for our strategic alignment session, his term for me explaining what I'd written for him to present that week. He'd listen with the glazed attention of someone mentally rehearsing their delivery, occasionally interjecting with gems like, "Let's make it more visionary," or "Can we add some disruption language?" Then he'd take my deck, slap his name on it, and stride into the C-suite like he'd just discovered fire. The first time it happened, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I'd spent 2 weeks analyzing our Q3 performance, identifying why our customer acquisition costs had spiraled out of control, and proposing a complete overhaul of our targeting strategy. Mark presented it to the board as his comprehensive market analysis. When the CFO praised the insight, Mark actually said, "I've been thinking about this problem for months." I sat 3 chairs down, invisible as wallpaper, while he collected accolades for my work. By the 6th time, I'd learned to watermark my thinking. Every slide I created had subtle markers, specific phrases, data visualization choices, even font selections that screamed my authorship to anyone who cared to look. Nobody looked, but I kept records original files with timestamps, email chains showing my drafts versus his revisions, usually just adding exclamation points and buzzwords. And most importantly, the metadata showing creation dates and authors. The breaking point came during the North Star campaign disaster. Our biggest client was hemorrhaging users after a data breach in their integrated platform, not our fault. But our problem since we managed their digital marketing. I worked 70 hours straight, built a crisis communication strategy, negotiated with their legal team, and created a recovery campaign that not only stopped the bleeding but actually improved their brand sentiment scores. The presentation I prepared was surgical in its precision, backed by real-time data and predictive modeling that would make any analyst weep with joy. Mark's contribution. He changed the font to Helvetica and added a slide with a picture of a lighthouse. For the metaphor, he explained. Then he walked into that client meeting and presented my strategy as the product of collaborative leadership thinking from the strategic team, meaning him. When the client's CEO specifically asked who developed the sentiment analysis model, Mark actually said, "We don't focus on individual contributions here. It's all about the team." The same man who had his name embroidered on his laptop bag. I started forwarding myself emails from my personal account, creating an external paper trail. Every model, every analysis, every spark of actual strategic thinking backed up and time-stamped. My insurance folder grew into subfolders original work. Mark's versions. Meeting recordings. Yes, Washington is a 2-party consent state. But nobody ever reads the meeting invites where I clearly stated recordings would be made for accuracy and follow-up purposes. The joke was, Mark couldn't analyze his way out of a paper bag. His idea of data analysis was asking me to make the numbers tell a better story. His strategic thinking peaked at, what if we made the logo bigger? But in the corporate theater of Viridian North, he was the leading man, and I was the stagehand dressed in black. Invisible but essential. The thing about being invisible, though nobody notices when you start collecting receipts. Tuesday, October 15th, 10:14 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the conference room clock, calculating how many hours of my life I'd wasted in Mark's strategic thinking sessions. We were reviewing the Q4 roadmap, or rather, I was explaining the roadmap I'd built while Mark nodded sagely and pretended to understand why our CPM rates were unsustainable. "I have concerns about the Meridian campaign," I said, pulling up slide 47. "The targeting parameters they're requesting will put us in violation of CCPA guidelines. We need to restructure the data collection." Mark held up his hand like he was stopping traffic. "Hannah," that pause, that fucking condescending pause. "I appreciate your attention to detail, really, but I need someone who can see the bigger picture here." "The bigger picture is a 7-figure fine from the California Attorney General," I replied. He leaned back in his chair, that calculated lean I'd seen him practice in his office when he thought no one was watching. Then he smiled, not at me, but at the room, at his invisible audience of admirers. "See, this is what I mean. I just don't think she's very strategic. She's too tactical." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Around the table, our colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Brad from product actually snorted. Melissa from legal suddenly found her laptop screen fascinating. The silence stretched until Mark filled it with a chuckle. "We need vision, not just spreadsheets." I felt something crack inside me, not break crack, like ice under pressure. Still holding but forever changed. 3 years of carrying this department, of being told I was invaluable in private and invisible in public, crystallized into perfect clarity. He wasn't just dismissing my work, he was positioning. This was the opening move in a chess game I didn't know we were playing. "Of course," I said, closing my laptop with deliberate calm. Vision, got it. The meeting continued for another 43 minutes. Mark pontificated about strategic imperatives and transformational thinking, while I took notes. Not about his rambling, I was documenting every person in that room, their reactions, their silence, witnesses, whether they knew it or not. That afternoon, I slipped out of our internal Slack channels one by one, #strategy team, #leadership council, #depth analytics ghost mode activated. I created a new folder on my personal drive, Spinal work, the thankless infrastructure that holds everything up until someone decides to snap it. I started my collection that very day. Screenshot of Mark's email at 2:47 p.m. asking me to fix the Meridian thing but keep it quiet. The Slack message at 3:15 where he told Brad that Hannah's great with numbers but doesn't get the business side. The revised presentation he sent at 4:22, where he'd removed my name from the credits slide and added a quote from Steve Jobs he'd clearly Googled 5 minutes earlier. That night, I sat in my Queen Anne apartment, drinking wine that cost more than I should spend, and made a decision. Mark thought I was tactical fine. I'd show him tactics, but tactics in service of a strategy he'd never see coming. Because the thing about being dismissed as not strategic, it makes people comfortable. They stop watching you. They stop guarding their flanks. They expose their soft underbelly while pontificating about vision. I pulled up my insurance folder and began organizing. 3 years of evidence suddenly had a purpose. Every dismissive comment, every stolen idea, every minor revision that erased my contributions, it all led to this moment, 10:14 a.m. The moment Mark Allen signed his own death warrant with a smirk and a chuckle. He thought I was tactical. He had no idea. Tactical is fixing problems. Strategic is making sure the right problems find the right people. And Mark Allen was about to become Viridian North's biggest problem. The next 3 weeks became my masterclass in digital archaeology. Every night after the office emptied, I'd stay behind, methodically excavating 3 years of corporate crimes. My dual monitors glowed like headlights as I worked through the graveyard shift of data forensics. First, the emails. Mark had a habit of forwarding sensitive threads with his own commentary, usually dismissive, often incriminating, like the one from August where he instructed the team to massage the attribution model until it shows what we promised. Or the gem from September where he explicitly told our data engineer to adjust the timestamp on the conversion tracking backdate it to before the campaign actually launched. I extracted them all, preserving the full headers, maintaining the chain of custody that any competent lawyer would appreciate. The Slack messages were a goldmine of casual corruption. Mark thought disappearing messages meant disappeared evidence. He didn't know about Slack's compliance exports, or that I'd been screenshotting our conversations in real time for months. His greatest hits included directing the team to exclude negative results from client reports, asking developers to build alternate dashboards for board presentations, and my personal favorite, a detailed thread about hiding a $3 million campaign loss by spreading it across multiple quarters and booking it as platform investment. But the real treasure was in the metadata. Every document tells 2 stories: what it says and how it was made. I pulled the properties from every presentation, every report, every strategic brief from the past 18 months, creation timestamps, modification histories, author information, the digital fingerprints that proved I'd created documents at 2 a.m. that Mark presented as his own at 9 a.m., version controls showing my 37 revisions versus his 1, always just changing the author name. I developed a system. Original files went into encrypted folders with hash verification, cryptographic proof they hadn't been tampered with. Screenshots were taken with timestamp apps that embedded verification data. Email exports were saved in multiple formats, with full MIME headers intact. I even found a service that would archive web pages with blockchain verification. Perfect for those Confluence pages Mark liked to edit after the fact. The flash drive, a military-grade encrypted device I'd bought with cash, became my constant companion. I called it Little Boy, because like its namesake, it was small, unassuming, and capable of leveling everything in its blast radius. Every night, I'd update it with new findings, then sync it to 3 different cloud services using VPNs and anonymous accounts. Redundancy was my religion. The pattern that emerged was damning. Mark wasn't just stealing credit. He was systematically falsifying performance data to the board. Every quarter showed the same manipulation, failed campaigns buried. Successful ones inflated. Attribution models twisted until they confessed to whatever story he wanted to tell. The North Star disaster I'd saved, reported as a strategic pivot that exceeded expectations. The Henderson account we'd lost due to his incompetence, blamed on market conditions and analyst limitations. I created visualizations that would make Edward Tufte weep timeline charts, showing the correlation between my work and Mark's presentations. Network diagrams mapping how credit flowed upward while blame flowed down. Scatter plots demonstrating the statistical impossibility of his reported success rates. Each chart was annotated, sourced, and bulletproof. The final piece came when I discovered his side arrangement with innovative metrics. Our independent measurement vendor. Turns out they weren't so independent when Mark was feeding them consulting fees to validate his cooked numbers. I found the invoices buried in expense reports. The emails discussing alignment on measurement philosophy. And most damningly, the actual versus reported data sets showing gaps that couldn't be explained by any legitimate methodologies. By November 5th, I had 847 files organized into a prosecutorial masterpiece, folder structures that told a story, naming conventions that screamed guilt, cross-references that would make a forensic accountant orgasm, all of it backed up, encrypted, and ready to deploy. I printed the executive summary, just 3 pages that distilled 3 years of fraud into bullet points a CEO could understand, slipped it into a manila folder labeled Chrono Lead in 16-point Helvetica, Mark's favorite font. Sometimes the little touches matter. The USB drive lived in a hidden pocket I'd sewn into my laptop bag. The cloud backups were scattered across 3 continents. The paper trail was locked in a safety deposit box at a bank Mark didn't even know existed. I was no longer tactical. I was surgical, and the operation was about to begin. November 12th, 3:00 p.m. The meeting invite had arrived that morning. Performance calibration discussion. Hannah Greer. HR speak for, "We're about to fuck you." But professionally. Mark's assistant had booked conference room 14B, the one with no windows, nicknamed the Tomb, for its popularity in terminations and teardowns. I dressed carefully that day, my best blazer, the one that said, "I have a lawyer on speed dial." Hair pulled back in what I called my testimony bun. I even wore my Wharton class ring. Turned inward so the insignia pressed against my palm, a reminder that I'd earned my place here long before Mark learned to spell synergy. The setup was textbook. Mark at the head of the table, trying to look grave but unable to hide the satisfaction in his eyes. Cheryl from HR flanking him with her tablet and practice neutrality. A manila folder between them, my performance file. No doubt filled with creative fiction. "Hannah, thanks for joining us," Mark began, as if I'd had a choice. "We wanted to discuss some concerns about your performance trajectory." I sat down slowly, placed my phone face up on the table, recording app already running, the notification clearly visible, and pulled out my own notepad. "Of course, I assume this is being documented." Cheryl nodded. "We'll provide you with a summary after." "I'll take my own notes." "Thanks." I clicked my pen. "Please continue." Mark launched into his prepared speech, my inability to see the strategic forest for the tactical trees, my resistance to collaborative ideation, my over-focus on granular details at the expense of vision. Corporate lorem ipsum. Meaningless words strung together to justify a predetermined conclusion. "Specific examples would be helpful," I interrupted. "For my notes." He fumbled through vague anecdotes. The Meridian campaign where I'd derailed momentum with compliance concerns. The board presentation where I'd confused leadership with excessive data points. Each example, interestingly, corresponded to times I'd saved the company from his incompetence. "I see," I said, writing Retaliation Title 7 in large letters. Cheryl's eye twitched. "And this performance concern, is it related to my work product quality?" It's about strategic thinking, Mark repeated, falling back on his favorite refrain. The strategic thinking that generated $4.7 million in recovered revenue last quarter. That was a team effort. According to my emails, I identified and rectified the attribution errors alone. Would you like me to forward those to Cheryl? The room temperature seemed to drop. Cheryl typed furiously on her tablet. Mark's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Hannah. Cheryl intervened. We're putting you on a performance improvement plan. You'll have 90 days to demonstrate strategic thinking capabilities aligned with your role expectations. I smiled. My first genuine smile in that building in months. Excellent. I assume these expectations will be clearly documented with measurable KPIs and comparative metrics showing how my performance differs from my peer group. Silence. I'll also need to understand the strategic thinking criteria. I continued. Is there a rubric? Has anyone else in my role been evaluated using these metrics? I'd hate to think this was subjective or... I paused, savoring the word. Discriminatory. Mark's face had progressed from satisfied to confused to alarmed. This wasn't following his script. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't begging. I was building a case. Of course it's not discriminatory, he sputtered. Wonderful. Then you won't mind if I request a calibration review with the diversity committee just to ensure the PIP process is being applied equitably across all demographics. Cheryl's typing intensified. Mark looked at her desperately. But she was in full CYA mode now, documenting every word that could become evidence. The PIP will outline clear expectations, Cheryl said carefully. We'll have it to you by end of week. Tuesday, I countered. Per the employee handbook, performance documentation must be provided within 48 hours of discussion, page 73, section 4.2.1. They had nothing left. The meeting limped to a close with vague threats disguised